I'd like to give you a little more information about how to teach your students to draw correctly labeled graphs. This is very important on the free response question of the AP exam because students can lose points for simple errors on graphs, and it's really easy for them to get full credit if they know each part of the graph that they're supposed to draw. So I'm going to show an example, and it's a two-part question, and this asks students to draw a correctly labeled graph of the loanable funds market of the United States, and then show the effect on the real interest rate if the level of savings in the United States increases. So let's first draw the loanable funds market, and we'll start with just two axes. And a great acronym that you can teach your students is ask them, have they aced their graphs? And this will take them step by step through all of the requirements. So the first letter is A, and that stands for axes. So both axes need to be labeled, and we want them to be as specific as possible. So for the loanable funds market, we don't just want them to write interest rate, we want them to write real interest rate because that is specific to this market. So the y-axis is real interest rate. And then for the x-axis, typically we have quantity. If students just write quantity, this is a neutral label. So we want them to be very specific for this market. So for the loanable funds market, it would be best if they wrote quantity of loanable funds, or I'm going to abbreviate quantity LF. So my two axes are labeled. The C stands for curves. So the loanable funds market has two curves, a downward sloping demand curve and an upward sloping supply curve. And these need to be labeled. And again, they need to be as specific as possible. It's just not enough to write D and S. So we'll start there, but let's make this specific to this graph. So we'll do demand for LF, standing for loanable funds, and supply LF, also standing for loanable funds. So the C is curves. The E is for equilibrium. So we want to start by indicating the original equilibrium in this market where the two curves intersect. So on the x-axis, we'll put Q, and on the y-axis, we'll put R for real interest rate. And note the dotted lines that connect the intersection out to each axis. That's very important. And then the D is going to stand for directional change, which we haven't done yet because we need to shift a curve. So the question asks us to show the effect on the real interest rate if the level of savings increases. So this will shift the supply curve to the right. So I'm going to draw a new supply curve. And there are several ways that I'm going to show a directional change. One is an arrow showing the direction of the shift from the original curve to the new curve. I also need to show directional change on each axis. The question asks us to show the effect on the real interest rate. So the real interest rate will fall, but students have to show the directional change on the axis. So they can do this by marking the new equilibrium, intersection, dotted lines out to each axis, and then an R1 and a Q1. If students want to be really thorough, then they can draw arrows here on each axis. The other thing students can do, which is recommended, is out to the side, write their conclusions based on the shift. And this can help if there's any ambiguity on their graph. So have students write here, for example, the real interest rate falls and the quantity of loanable funds increases. So after every graph, have students go through this checklist. Do I have each axis labeled? Do I have each curve labeled? Do I have my equilibrium indicated? And have I shown directional change?